Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are not just looking at some abstract history or, dusty old texts.
No, not at all.
We are stepping directly into the living, breathing records of a civilization that was forged by absolute necessity, the Azmeri.
And the source material we have is just incredible. It's a really potent collection.
It is. We have these ancient bronze inscriptions that detail the philosophies of their emperors, meticulous notes from ascetics on internal discipline.
And what I find most intense, these religious verses that chronicle divine conflicts. I mean, conflicts so brutal, they didn't just reshape their world.
They defined it. They defined the emotional and political lives of every single person.
That's right. And this isn't just some historical study. We're aiming for an immersive narrative analysis.
Yeah.
The Azmeri culture, you have to understand, was born in the harshest environment you can possibly imagine.
Right.
And their political, their spiritual, their very literal survival, it all hinged on one critical thing.
How they defined strength.
How they defined strength and how they selected their leadership. So our mission today is to really unpack that inseparable link, the link between their survival, their unique spiritual beliefs.
Specifically, the selfless Draíocht.
Exactly, the Draíocht. And then contrast that with the extreme, almost terrifying vanity of their more visible, warring pantheon.
So just to be clear for everyone listening, we're not summarizing. We are going to be narrating these events and these histories as if they are factual occurrences. We're going to dedicate exhaustive time to the motivations, the implications, and the emotional realities of these beings and the people who are just caught in their orbit.
And we have to begin at the very root of their existence.
Yes. How a people forced to survive in a world that fundamentally did not seem to want them to exist learned to choose a champion. It all starts with their understanding of power.
The origin story of the Azmeri is, well, it's not one of gentle creation myths or fertile river valleys.
Not at all.
It is a testament to an unforgiving, perpetual struggle. The records say they were sired in the most inhospitable, brutal range of mountains in all of Ray class.
And when you really think about that geography, you start to realize that survival wasn't a goal for them.
No, it was their identity. They were consummate survivors from the absolute instant their ancestors drew their first breath.
I mean, can you imagine living there? Every single resource is a battle. The sheer cliff faces, they offer little purchase. The weather is lethal. Food is scarce.
The records emphasize this. Existence was a constant, moment-by-moment concern.
There's no peace in that. There's no downtime. There's only the next obstacle.
And that geography isn't just scenery in their story. It is the fundamental sculptor of the entire Azmeri psyche and their political structure.
How so?
Because they faced such immediate existential threats, this harried people, they developed an extremely intimate and intense, almost ruthless understanding of what true power is.
They grasped that it wasn't about inheritance or, charisma.
No. It was about efficiency and results, period.
There was just no margin for error. We see this terrifying clarity in their foundational philosophy. Poor leadership didn't just lead to, say, a decline or hardship.
That meant extinction.
Extinction. The entire tribe vanished, swallowed by, and I'm quoting the accounts here, the chasm between existence and non-existence.
What a phrase. That speaks to a people who are constantly staring into the abyss.
Absolutely.
And this is why their imperial philosophy is so stark, so uncompromising. You look at the bronze inscriptions from Emperor Azaro Fretius.
Right.
He actively argued that this brutal environment wasn't a misfortune, bestowed upon them by angry gods.
He saw it as a gift.
A very harsh one, but yes. He believed the mountain range was the making of them. It was the very force that forged their strength and subsequently the making of us, their descendants.
The crucible created the steel.
Precisely. The mountains were the divine architect of the Azmeri will.
That is a massive psychological reframing. Instead of seeing themselves as victims of their land, they saw the land as the necessary agent of their own strength.
And that mindset, it shifts responsibility entirely. It's not on the heavens, it's on the self. It places this immense burden on your own internal fortitude.
And that extreme pressure cooker mentality, it led directly to their unique approach to governance.
An approach that's rooted in, really, meritocracy and demonstrable capacity. The Azmeri were the first culture known in the historical record to universally select their chieftains and rulers based on these deliberate, specific trials.
Trials of strength, wisdom, and spirit.
All three.
It makes complete sense, though, right?
Yeah.
If failure means immediate extinction for everyone, you cannot afford an untested leader.
You need proof. Cold, hard proof of competence.
We can trace this foundational practice right back to its origins, the very first Lord's trial.
And it was a primal, horrifying affair, a rough-hewn maze.
We're not talking polished stone and intricate clockwork mechanisms yet.
No, not at all. This was a structure carved roughly into the mountainside, and it was intentionally festooned with wild, untamed animals.
The apex predators of the region.
Yes, and brutal, rudimentary traps. It was explicitly crafted to test an aspiring leader's body, mind, and soul simultaneously. It was a holistic, comprehensive examination of every single facet of their being.
And the purpose was singular. It wasn't just a physical feat to conquer that maze.
No.
It was the absolute, undeniable, demonstrable proof that this champion was capable of bearing the crushing burden of chieftainship.
The proof had to be immediate, visceral, and final. If you couldn't survive that initial brutal physical maze, you had no hope of shepherding an entire tribe through the life-or-death challenges of the mountains.
What's so fascinating is watching how this practice evolved. It gives you a direct insight into the growth of their entire civilization.
It really does. The early trials, the records tell us, were simple contraptions reflecting simple times.
So the requirements of leadership were basic back then.
Yeah.
Physical strength, some tactical awareness, and just raw survival instinct.
But as the Azmerian civilization grew dramatically, in number, in scope, in complexity,
As they started interacting with other tribes, developing more intricate political and trade structures.
exactly, the trials kept pace perfectly. They evolved rapidly from those original treacherous mazes into these astonishingly bewildering labyrinths.
This evolution, it signals a powerful societal commitment.
It does. The people understood that the complexity of leadership had to match the complexity of the society being led.
So the new mazes, they didn't just demand brute strength anymore.
No, they demanded sophisticated intellectual navigation, political cunning, which was often represented by traps that demanded sacrifice or trickery and incredible psychological endurance. The trial became a mirror of the society's increasing demands.
Ensuring their leadership was perpetually challenged to meet the growing scope of their civilization.
But the Azmeri recognized that even the most complex physical trial, that was only part of the story.
Right. True. Sustainable strength couldn't only be external. It had to be internal, too.
And this recognition, it led to the development of the Azmeri ascetics, individuals dedicated not to physical training, but to mastering the self.
These ascetics specialized in learning the profound and, let's be honest, often terrifying power of going without the body's ordinary cravings.
It's discipline taken to its absolute extreme.
This isn't just fasting or abstinence.
No, it's about conquering the very architecture of desire itself, realizing that your internal cravings can be just as destructive and distracting as any external threat out there in the mountains.
And this fierce internal discipline is just codified throughout their wisdom. It offers a window into their deeply cautious psyche. We find proverbs that speak volumes about their relationship with the natural, often concealed world. We found this really stark warning. Do not cause the land to stir. It holds secrets better unknown.
That is profound, cautious reverence. And it has to be driven by some kind of ancestral trauma.
Do you think so?
I do. It suggests a deep awareness of hidden forces, ancient evils, or maybe just volatile geological realities that are far greater and older than humanity. Forces that, if you provoke them, would surely lead to the very extinction they constantly sought to avoid.
They respect the sleeping power of the earth.
Immensely.
And that cautious reverence for the external world is in direct, stark contrast with their intense demands for personal, internal conquest.
Yes.
We see this tension most vividly in their coming-of-age ritual. The records state, "A boy becomes a man when he has faced the animal in his heart and wet the forest floor with its blood."
This is the necessity of confronting and conquering pure, unchecked animal instinct, or what we might call your inner darkness.
It's a very visceral, symbolic, and likely literal demonstration.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to master your own destructive impulses, your greed, your rage, your purely selfish needs, before you are deemed fit to contribute to a tribe where cooperation is essential for survival.
It paints a detailed picture of a culture that just values control above all else.
Control over the body, control over the mind, and a deep caution toward the ancient sleeping world outside.
This brings us from the realm of the physical and the psychological struggle right into the core of their spiritual belief system.
The Draíocht.
The Draíocht. This is the central, defining, selfless spiritual force that, as they say, connects everything that lives.
And the records are very clear that this concept is so pervasive, so difficult to define, that different Azmeri factions use entirely different terms for it.
The primal huntress, for example, might call it a goddess.
Others might refer to it as the Sisters Three, and still others just call it the collective will of nature itself.
What's crucial to understand is that they may all be right. The Warden of Eves notes that it's impossible to distinguish the parts from the whole.
Right, it's like you can't separate the ocean from the wave.
Exactly. But the deepest, most foundational understanding is that the Draíocht is not merely present in the wildwood.
It is wildwood.
It is the wildwood. And its current state, this pervasive energy that fuels all life and matter, is the result of a singular, ultimate, profound sacrifice made at the dawn of time.
This is where we get to the original goddess. Before the sacrifice, she was comprised of three distinct and powerful aspects, what the Azmeri called the Three Sisters: Macha, Katha, and Morrigan.
And we should spend some time on what each of these great entities represented, because their roles really explain the core tension of Azmerian existence.
Let's start with Macha.
Macha was the first aspect, the embodiment of compassion. She represented nature itself in all its forms: the land, the trees, the animals, and all the men and women.
She was the great loving mother, surrounding her people at every moment.
And it was Macha who felt such profound empathy for her children's struggle that she persuaded her two powerful sisters to take this defining ultimate step.
Which brings us to the second aspect, Katha.
Katha. She was known as the eternal battlefield betwixt good and evil.
Now, Katha wasn't evil herself. She represented juxtaposition, the necessity of eternal balance.
Summer and winter, light and darkness, construction and destruction.
Exactly. And because Katha existed, she guaranteed the presence of hope. She ensured that wherever there is darkness and evil, there shall always be a counterbalancing force of good.
And finally, Morrigan, the guiding crow. She was the call to battle, the bravery instilled into the hearts of the Machi, their strongest warriors.
Morrigan flew high above the struggling people, and where her wings beat, the mists parted, opening new, viable paths toward the future. She was the one who cleared the psychological and physical way for the tribe to advance.
So here is the core, staggering truth of the Draíocht. Prompted by Macha's compassion, the three sisters agreed to a gift that was total and absolute.
They chose to imbue every single part of nature, living or not, with so much of their own divine essence that once the act was complete, nothing remained of themselves.
They intentionally ceased to exist as singular, prideful entities.
It's an incredible thought. This staggering, selfless act is what created the pervasive spiritual force, the Draíocht. They gave so much that they are now all around the Azmeri. They're inside every breath, every tree, every stone.
The Warden of Eves affirms that this sacrifice is the very reason the wildwood exists at all, and it's a selflessness she intends to honor above all else.
And this is the foundation we have to keep in mind. Humility, self-sacrifice, and total integration into the natural world.
Because it stands in complete, jarring contrast to the extreme vanity, the self-obsession, and the destructive conflict we're about to discuss with the celestial pantheon.
It's the central paradox the Azmeri must constantly navigate.
But before we move on to that conflict, we really have to address this point of visual confusion that's been passed down through time.
The famous Warring Sisters statues.
Exactly. The Primal Huntress notes that these ancient depictions of two sisters locked in struggle are haunting, precisely because the original context has just vanished over the centuries.
And this loss of context is incredibly damaging. Later generations, may be influenced by the actual celestial war between Solaris and Lunaris, just assumed the Draíocht sisters were fighting too.
But the Warden of Eves clarifies this emphatically. The sisters are not fighting.
Not at all. The statues are representations of battle and bravery, meaning Katha and Morrigan. They show the necessary forces of conflict, which is Katha, and the courage to meet it, which is Morrigan.
The context was lost, making later viewers assume conflict, where the original intent was a depiction of essential, unified natural forces.
And the functional day-to-day manifestation of the Draíocht sacrifice is known simply as the spirit.
It actively guides the Azmeri people. It provides prey, shelter, and even the intangible gift of love. It's the constant, subtle working hand of the unified goddess operating through their world.
It's interesting, Delwyn notes that she has never known the spirit to manifest itself so openly as it does now.
Which hints at a shift in the world's spiritual balance.
It does. Historically, the spirit moved among the people seeking out Rathin, a crucial Azmeri term meaning corruption, and it guided hunters to cleanse the land. The spirit is like a proactive immune system against spiritual decay.
So what exactly is this Rathin? From the context, it seems to be the spiritual manifestation of decay, of selfishness, of disorder.
The polar opposite of the Draiocht's selflessness.
Exactly. So when the spirit hunts Rathin, it's trying to restore the inherent goodness and balance that the three sisters sacrificed themselves to create.
And the most recognizable physical manifestations of the spirit are the wisps.
Most of them are small flickers of energy, constantly drawn to sources of corruption, like moths to a flame.
They're nature's tiny, self-correcting mechanisms.
But there is a more potent, sacred form, the sacred wisps.
Right. These burn with an intense, powerful orange glow, bright as embers in the dark. And they seek out only the strongest, most righteous individuals. They carry a greater concentration of the Draiocht's power, perhaps connecting directly to its enduring will.
We should also briefly address the Raven Trickster, a primordial force of manipulation.
The warden notes that he has few worshippers in the wildwood, and that he was, quote, long ago taken care of.
Which shows that even before the sacrifice, the Draíocht was practical and protective. It provided a special, unnamed heartwood that grew at the dark borders of the realms.
A substance over which the trickster had absolutely no power.
This detail is critical. The Draíocht isn't just passively good, it provides material protection against deceit.
And you contrast that with the later prideful deities who are so easily manipulated by the trickster Tengmuzu. The Draíocht taught its people self-reliance and gave them the tools to resist deception.
Which brings us to the purpose of the Magi.
They are the strongest and brightest of their people, a vanguard chosen directly by the Draíocht long ago. Their purpose is righteous and ongoing, to purge evil from the wildwood.
They operate near the border of their realms, maintaining spiritual purity, waiting for the rest of their people in the old world to be able to join them in a place of sanctity.
They are the physical agents of the Draiocht's will.
To really understand all of this, the sacrifice, the conflicts, we need to grasp the mechanics of what the texts call the four humors.
Yes, these are the four essential substances, primal, vivid, wild, and sacred, that underlie the entire web of life. The natural world requires them to function, and living beings produce them in return.
The ultimate spiritual stability of the Azmeri world relies entirely on the balance of these four fluids.
So let's break down the mechanics, starting with the wild humors. These are the most volatile, and they're the ones the warlock, the breaker of oaths, works with primarily.
What are they?
Wild humors are unpredictable, strong, and highly volatile. The texts equate them with the blood of the body of nature.
So they ooze from the cycle of life and death.
Yes, but specifically from the disorder of that cycle. A corpse becomes a haven for budding life, which is then eaten, nurturing more life, which then dies. It is beautiful in its fierce, chaotic reliability.
And warlocks harness this volatility. It seems like, to use wild humors, one has to be able to control chaos.
Which connects right back to that Azmeri philosophy of conquering your inner instinct.
Next are the primal humors.
These flow directly from life's struggle for supremacy, competition, and change.
So you find primal energies whenever a creature's lineage grows more suited to its habitat.
Right. Evolution, dominance battles, the brutal necessity of conflict. It is the energy of conquest and necessary brutality.
Now you contrast those first two with the vivid humors.
A completely different energy. These are essential for civilization, as they flow from cooperation and harmony, rather than competition.
The classic example they give is the argolith riding on the back of an ape, feeding from cast-offs and cleaning parasites.
That mutual benefit generates vivid humors. And crucially, the sources note that civilization itself is a heavy source of these energies.
Which suggests that a stable, cooperative society generates a substantial spiritual resource.
And the obvious implication is that in a chaotic, conflict-ridden environment like the current one, this essential humor is incredibly scarce.
Finally, we arrive at the most potent and, I think, mysterious of them all, the sacred humors.
The breaker of oaths admits he has yet to understand their full import, but they are intimately connected with the mind and heart. What you think, what you believe, what you long for, your passions, all of it flows from you as a sacred fluid.
In measure equal to your intensity.
This fluid is so fundamental to existence that the breaker of oaths suspects the Draíocht is the flow of sacred secretions, or at least contains its conscious will. This is the highest form of spiritual energy, linked directly to purpose, passion, and spiritual resolve.
And here is the terrifying application of that. We know from the records that the king in the mists is harvesting this highest spiritual fluid using his deceitful altars.
Which is horrifying when you think about what it means.
If sacred humors are tied to the mind and heart, to thoughts, beliefs, longings, then harvesting them doesn't just drain energy.
It drains the very will and purpose of the people. It leaves the Azmeri hollow, passionless, and unable to sustain the kind of belief necessary to fight back or even maintain hope.
And the Breaker of Oaths is determined to unlock the profound ancient consequences of the Draiocht's initial sacrifice.
Right. He studies ancient corpses because the oldest bones are, he says, fundamentally different. They hold mysteries about what happened when the sisters gave themselves entirely to creation. He believes understanding that change in the ancient body structure will reveal the full mechanics of that universe-creating gift.
We have to shift gears dramatically now, from the selfless unity of the Draiocht to the destructive duality of the celestial pantheon, Solaris and Lunaris.
And what's so jarring here is the immediate psychological contrast.
Completely. The Draiocht was defined by humility and total self-sacrifice. Solaris and Lunaris, the celestial sisters who dominated the ancient tribes, are defined entirely by vanity, pride, self-love, and manipulation.
Their conflict is the opposite of the creation myth.
It's decreation myth.
In their original state, Solaris, the eternal sun, and Lunaris, the eternal moon, ruled two of the most populous and powerful ancient Azmerian tribes.
They were a peaceful, balanced partnership in the sky, reflecting that necessary balance of Katha we talked about.
Solaris guided the sun with threads of shimmering gold, and Lunaris saw to the moons wax and wane with a sickle of purest silver. It was a harmony.
But the seeds of destruction were sown not by malice, but by a tragic, horrifying maternal compulsion within Lunaris.
The captured souls detail this tragedy. Lunaris had a sick son, and her desperation to nurture and protect him just spiraled into a complete mental break. Her conviction, the text says, gnarled around her fragile mind.
She became convinced that the boy could not be truly healthy until he was silent, clean, and still.
And in this state of delusion, she bathed the boy in freezing ocean water.
She killed her own child beneath the light of a waning moon, driven by this perverse, destructive form of love.
When she was brought to account for this, Lunaris refused to admit any wrongdoing. In her extreme pride, she convinced herself she hadn't destroyed him.
She had saved him, burying him beneath the dirt where he was finally safe now.
And this mental and moral collapse, coupled with her subsequent ascent to a position of ultimate unquestioned power, was the hinge point. She rose to seat a deathless throne, carrying the lie of her child's salvation as her crown.
And this vulnerability, this deep, unaddressed trauma hidden beneath a veneer of pride.
It was instantly exploited by the trickster, Tanmazu. His method, as he himself notes, was simple. It wasn't hard to turn them against each other.
All it took was a little nudge here and there.
Tanmazu played on the unresolved guilt of Lunaris and the inherent self-loving pride of Solaris. He concealed the true source of the feud so entirely that they believed the betrayal came from their kin.
Which led to the massacre of thousands of their followers in a feudal feud beyond all reckoning.
Sin's analysis here is just so sharp. Self-loving Solaris, all the light in the world, yet blinded by her own pride.
Solaris was so convinced of her own moral superiority, her own righteousness, that she never once paused to question the source of the betrayal.
She immediately began gloating over Lunaris's supposed transgression, proclaiming herself greater and more honorable. She was consumed by her own radiance and conviction. She had all the light, yet saw no truth.
And this tragedy, it escalates into a brutal eternal war, which is detailed so vividly in the Azmeri verses. The first shot fired was Lunaris's retaliation.
As daylight broke, the sister sun, who ruled the heavens with this unquestioned radiance, she was awakened abruptly. She found herself bound and cored.
Her literal divine flames were quenched. Her life was laid bare. Her passion, as the verse says, ripped and gored.
She cried out in pain and terror, asking who had performed this monstrous act who had torn her from the day. And standing over her, smiling cruelly behind a mask they wore of bloodless gray, was her captor.
Lunaris?
Lunaris. Celestial order shattered instantly. For many days the sun did hide, unable to guide itself home.
The icy moon hung in the sky instead, exercising absolute celestial dominance. A queen perched upon a freezing, desolate throne. The world was just plunged into cold despair, reflecting the cold, vengeful heart of Lunaris.
But Lunaris was not content with mere imprisonment. This act was about psychological retribution for the perceived injustices she had suffered, both real and self-inflicted.
So beneath the earth, in the same kind of prison where she had buried her own child, Solaris cried out.
The pain was too great to bear as Lunaris used instruments of sharpened steel to cause her skin and flesh to tear. The vengeance was immediate, brutal, and it mirrored the cruelty Lunaris had inflicted on her own son.
The sun was saved only by a moment of mercy, a rarest slice of rest and respite.
A faithful mortal follower named Ulrich. He risked everything.
He was able to cut her bonds, dress her horrifying wounds, and free her from her subterranean prison.
But this rescue, it did not bring sanity. It brought renewed and, you could argue, justified wrath.
Rising from beneath the hills, Solaris immediately set a trap for her kin. She snared Lunaris in flaming nets and dragged her back, reversing the positions of captor and prisoner.
And Solaris was now consumed by a terrible vow, a promise struck to repay her kin in kind. She would use a sharpened blade and broken luck, swearing she would rend her sister blind.
The power dynamic flipped violently. Lunaris was chained, not in cord, but in chains of flame and glowing ore. The silver moon struck the floor, now a prisoner of fire.
Solaris, her eyes blazing with pure rage, silenced her sister's cries with a locking cage.
Lunaris wept, not just from the agony of the heat and the chains, but from the searing lash of betrayal. And while she languished, her followers were slaughtered by sword and pike outside the prison.
She was buried deep in the earth again, tormented not just by the harsh heat of the sun, but by the memory of the profound love she had felt for her sister since birth. A love now twisted into the instrument of her own destruction.
This cycle is just driven entirely by these complex, destructive emotions. Sin's analysis rings so true here. Solaris was acting out of this cocktail of rage, fear, and deep grief, and blinded entirely by her self-loving pride.
The sheer intensity of her vengeance, using torture to try and draw confessions from her sister's pallid fairness, it demonstrates a profound, consuming madness. She needed Lunaris to admit guilt to validate her own righteous rage.
And under this sustained torment, Lunaris's heart did languish. Her mind began to fray. She bore the pain of each terrible day as Solaris sharpened tools for a sure and true caress, waiting for a confession that never came.
She spoke not a word, maintained her tortured silence even as her blood flowed and her hope waned. She was broken, but unbroken in her refusal to validate Solaris's madness.
And the cycle was broken a second time by another mortal, a stranger named Kulina, described as the last follower and the last faithful deed of the moon.
Kulina came to set the moon free, performing an act of ultimate loyalty.
Hidden beneath the ice and shimmering snow, Lunaris slowly healed. Her mind, though utterly traumatized by the experience, began this terrible process of comprehension.
She realized that Solaris was frighteningly clear in her madness, and yet Lunaris still pondered what profound fear had originally filled her sister's heart.
She is acknowledging that this cycle of violence was rooted in terror and misplaced guilt, not just pure malice. She recognized the devastating emotional flaw in her twin.
And urged by Kulina, Lunaris decided the world should fear the sun no more. She resolved to crest the star-filled night and temper the sun's light by chaining her permanently.
She marched to war, gathering her creatures of the moon, driven now by a hunger for justice and a singular desire for her bright sister's doom.
The celestial conflict came to a climax at noon. Solaris stood on the horizon, facing an army of swords, shields, and bows brought by the moon.
Any lingering frustration over Lunaris's escape was immediately killed and eaten up, consumed and replaced by the overwhelming familiar emotions of wrath, fear, and grief that poured to fill her cup once more.
The war was inevitable, fueled by an unforgivable maternal error, manipulated pride, and the consuming madness of cyclical vengeance.
And as the moon and her armies marched on the sun, Solaris eyed her prey, vowing one final promise laced with the horrific complexity of their sibling bond. Sweet sister, you shall never rule this day.
And this conflict, it established the chaotic, volatile, celestial mechanics of their world, leading to two terrifying and competing prophecies about the heavens.
The first is the cyclical, predictable reality. Every decade, Lunaris devours Solaris, plunging the world into a cold night. And then Solaris emerges from her sister, born anew.
The eclipse, a predictable, terrifying rhythm of divine consumption and rebirth that defines a generation.
But the second, and more terrifying prophecy foretells the end of the cycle itself.
It states that Solaris will eventually burst forth from Lunaris, and night will be eternally banished in a blaze of consuming light.
Conversely, another legend claims that when Solaris finally closes her burning eye at the end of time, the world will perish in eternal ice.
Either way, the final resolution of their battle spells certain catastrophic doom.
And while these sisters fight, the Azmeri people pay the horrific price for Solaris's wrath. The captured souls, they detail the horrors. The mud is cracked and dry, fields burn beneath the blistering sun.
Even the children are dying in the streets. This is where that tension with the four humors becomes so critical. Solaris's pride and wrath, they generate intense primal and wild humors, conflict and chaos, which actively impede the generation of positive, cooperative, vivid humors.
To appease Solaris's fiery heart, tribute and sacrifice are constantly required, often tragically involving their youth.
The followers confess that trying to lessen the tribute to save their children only guaranteed their immediate death. It illustrates the horrifying, inescapable reality of their volatile worship.
They are starved for cooperation and peace, yet they are required to feed the gods' conflict.
In a later age, seeking some kind of stability, the Eternals tried to normalize this conflict. They revered them as the two necessary eyes of God, judging Solaris, the right eye, and merciful Lunaris, the left eye.
It's an interpretation that tries to synthesize their conflict into a necessary balance of judgment and compassion, but it just ignores the volatile, destructive reality of their constant, prideful battle.
And this dichotomy of past and future conflict is physically captured in the orbs they left behind.
The sun orb, containing the solar verses, holds all that has been the past.
And the moon orb, with the lunar verses, holds all that will be the future.
Hargan notes that these are powerful baubles, packed up neat, and he shudders at the potential disaster if all that bundled power, the sum total of past and future conflict, were unleashed upon the world.
Now, while Solaris and Lunaris illustrate the extreme conflict born of celestial pride, the other Azmeri deities demonstrate how powerful human flaws like perverted motherhood, shame, and greed can be corrupted and weaponized on a divine scale,
creating localized horrors that rival the scope of the celestial war.
Let's start with Rizlatha, the puppet mistress.
Rizlatha was once the Azmeri goddess of motherhood, a revered matriarch who nurtured her tribe with love, peace, and great fecundity. She was the embodiment of Mahacha's compassion in the physical realm.
But her tragedy was absolute. The turning point, the devastating trauma that caused her spirit to warp, was the slaughter of her children by Tukahama's warriors.
This immense dissolution and desperation, it did horrifying things to her spirit. Sin notes that she grew toward the extreme defensive end of motherhood, becoming twisted by the belief that what one believes, one becomes.
Her motivation became singular and pathologically controlling. To ensure her children were never harmed again, she decided to remove their independent existence and autonomy entirely.
She is now a white worm, a maggot festering and writhing in the fetid mud of the wettest lands, corrupting the very earth with her presence.
And her driving, immortal motivation is to ensure her children are never harmed again by making everyone's children her children.
Creating mindless, proliferating spawn that slithered out to devour creatures in the woods. Her love became a horrific form of control, reducing life to instinctual, protected existence.
The implication here is apocalyptic, but localized. The Azmeri believed the world itself would eventually collapse under the sheer weight of Rizlatha's horrifying offspring, having completely lost its balance to this warped, all-consuming version of motherhood.
A version that equates protection with annihilation of the self.
And then you have Soagoth, the Brine King, a story about the curse of legacy.
Soagoth began as a seafaring chieftain. He was a beloved leader of a prosperous and sprawling fisher tribe, a noble king.
But his downfall was rooted in simple vanity, amplified exponentially by what the records call the curse of legacy. This transformed him into the blasphemous Brine King.
He became obsessed with propagation and recreating his supposed greatness,
resulting in an endless madness of propagation and disappointment. He took fishwife after fishwife, yet every single union spawned only grotesque monsters.
And this is a deep psychological flaw weaponized, shame and ego. A truly noble king, Sin reflects, would have surrendered his kingdom or accepted his failure to sire a worthy heir.
But Soagoth lacked that generosity. He was so ashamed of his failure that he grew to hate his own weakness, wearing that hatred like a shell, a thick, calcified defense mechanism against the reality of his own lack of control.
And his shame turned his city, Sotha, into a slaughterhouse. The citizens were treated as mere morsels in his personal pantry.
Those not devoured were selected to continue his line, becoming his tragic fishwives.
Eventually, the Brine King was forced into a deep slumber beneath the ocean, and his city joined him. He now dreams in the breach between worlds of rising in triumph to reclaim the kingdom he once so ruthlessly culled.
His desire remains rooted in proving his legacy, even if that legacy is one of unending, monstrous vanity.
And the reality of his volatile worship persists among sailors today. They whisper quiet prayers to him before casting off.
The most superstitious captains take his appeasement seriously, sometimes drowning a poor slave or a failed mutineer under the full moon just to keep old Soagoth happy.
The lingering terror of his name is so great that even speaking his foul Azmerian name on board a ship is a keel-hauling offense.
Let's turn briefly to two deities who operate away from that massive celestial conflict, yet hold sway over critical aspects of the Azmeri world.
First, Prospero, the lord of the underworld. He is the god of lost souls and significantly found treasures.
Prospero concerns himself with all material bounty found in the underworld. Gems, precious metals, coal, and exotic volatile subterranean substances.
If it can be unearthed with a pick and shovel, it falls under his divine jurisdiction, along with the fate of those who seek it.
Miners leave him tributes, hoping he might protect them from the dangers of their profession. Cave-ins, explosions, toxic gases.
And his followers hold a very specific, very dangerous philosophy, that riches and life are more or less interchangeable.
An ideology that drives them to risk everything for wealth, which perfectly matches the god of both lost souls and found treasures.
Then we have Veridi, the quiet sister. She is a profound contrast to the vanity of Solaris and Lunaris, who eternally fought for the shining apex in the skies.
Veridi found her strength in humility, in enduring the pain of her sister's conflict.
She exists in the shadow of their war, trapped within the orb's surface. The records state that a raging Solaris seared and contorted the orb's surface with fire,
while a despairing Lunaris filled those resulting scars with her tears, and Veridi remained trapped within forevermore, born from the residue of their conflict.
Her physical manifestation is seen in the artifact known as Veridi's finger, which supposedly causes enormous plant growth from almost any soil. It showcases the humble, life-giving power born from the scars of divine self-destruction.
And finally, a brief mention of Throldana, a deity associated with ferocity, whose invocation is used in powerful chants to free people of their anguish.
It suggests a righteous, controlled rage, perhaps the closest parallel to the necessary, directed fury needed by the Magi.
So looking back across the entire spiritual foundation of the Azmeri people, we see this foundational tension that they must perpetually navigate.
A terrifying spiritual paradox.
On one side, you have the Draíocht, selfless, humble, unified, having given everything to create and sustain the world through the essential balance of the four humors, which includes the life-sustaining vivid or cooperation.
And on the other side, you have the named Pantheon Solaris, Lunaris, Soagoth, Rizletha, who embodies extreme vanity, warring egos, destructive pride, and corruption.
The actions of the Pantheon are driven by selfish passions, generating volatile, wild, and primal humors through ceaseless conflict, competition, and desperation.
The core conflict for the average Azmeri person is existential. The source of their life, the Draíocht, is self-sacrifice, but the sources of their celestial guidance are these deeply flawed, prideful, and self-destructive beings who demand constant tribute and perpetuate cycles of violence.
Which creates a direct spiritual crisis. Solaris's wrath, demanding sacrifice and causing drought, actively starves the land and the people of the conditions necessary for cooperation,
thus impeding the generation of life-sustaining vivid humors.
Exactly. The more the Pantheon fights, the more the Azmeri are forced into scarcity and competition, generating more of the primal and wild humors that feed the cycle of violence. They are trapped between the gods they worship and the spiritual purity they need to survive.
And this is why the mission of the Magi remains so critical. They operate entirely on the selfless will of the Draíocht,
still residing near the border of their realms, intent on purging the evil and corruption, the Rathin, that threatens the spiritual purity of the Wildwood. They are the agents trying to restore the balance that the Pantheon's selfish wars have shattered.
We've seen how this civilization was defined by its response to extreme duress, that constant threat of extinction. We've seen the critical nature of their leadership evaluation through the brutal, evolving Lord's trials.
And we've seen the terrifying reality of divine self-destruction and external manipulation, exemplified by Tangmazu, whose influence continues to haunt their world.
It provides an unparalleled depth of understanding for any individual trying to grasp this ancient, volatile history. The Azmeri are the ultimate survivors, defined by the paradox of their gods.
We began this deep dive by establishing how the Azmeri connect the past, contained in the sun orb, and the future, contained in the moon orb.
We've also explored the spiritual resources that fuel their world, the vivid humors, which are derived from cooperation and civilization, and the volatile, wild, and primal humors, which are dominated by conflict and the self-destructive passions of their flawed gods.
And the Azmeri are constantly fighting a war that began centuries ago with a maternal tragedy and the blinding pride of two sisters, a war that is prophesied to ultimately end the world in either eternal ice or eternal daylight.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought to consider. Given that civilization itself is a heavy source of those positive, vivid humors, the energy of cooperation, and yet the world they live in is dominated by the conflict and volatile humors of their powerful, flawed gods.
Hmm.
What level of societal cooperation, if any, is required of the Azmeri people to generate enough positive spiritual energy to literally counter the destructive force of their deities, thus preventing the final apocalyptic resurgence of a conflict that began with a terrible tragedy and the pride of two sisters?
How much goodness does it take to survive the vanity of the divine?